But I don't know how Zoom works. If you do that with a video, that's how it works. But I think this is fine.
I got a full tank of gas now, so my anxiety level is reduced by a factor of a lot.
That sounds like a metaphor for life.
That was those. We were on fumes there for a minute, buddy. That was quite something.
This might make it into the show. In fact, you know what? I'm keeping all of that. And now this is the fake second version part of the show. So we're recording now.
I love it. That's great. Yeah. Hey, look, you got a little behind the scenes, little outtake there, lunatic.
Yeah, it's pretty beautiful. Well, at this point, it only makes sense, I think, to start the show as I slowly talk to get ready. What do you say?
Let's do it.
Welcome to Hot Lou Happy Hour. I am host Lou Abramowski. You know what? It didn't give me time to improv this. Okay, improvisationally known as Hot Lou.
I am flabbergasted and speechless, Mike Franklin. Also, definitely not driving. Not driving. This is a camera. This is one of those Zoom backgrounds.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised there's not a bat in your background now that he has become really one of the most popular members of the cast.
I mean, top 3.
Yeah, it'd be, he's probably crept in front of me on occasion.
Well, I'm confident that there is a segment of the lunatics that would prefer the bat over me, especially when we talk Hot Lou News Network items, which I think we are going to today.
We are, but we are going to leave all of our clothes on and not get a massage, which is the reason I think the bat has actually usurped me from time to time. So, yeah, I think there's kind of a couple of pretty big deals that we need to kind of talk about on the Hot Lou News Network. I don't know where to start.
I'm so upset, Lou, when big news breaks and I'm barely paying attention to understand what's going on.
Oh, you mean like on, say, a late Friday night?
I mean, for example.
Yeah. I mean, what a weird coincidence that you would pick that, considering there was kind of a big news item that dropped really late on Friday night last week.
Oh, what was it, Lou?
So it turns out that our president For maybe some of the lunatics, they might say hashtag not my president, but
Go ahead and say that. He's still your president.
yeah, I think
Adorable.
chief fact checker Josh Kimber would admit that he is everybody's president, or
Yeah,
at least America's president, right?
he's America's president. You don't have to like him. In fact, many of you don't, and that's cool. That's totally cool. He's still your president.
That's true. So when Donald J. Trump commuted the sentence of none other than Roger Stone, really the real life criminal mastermind that exists in the world. And the only person that I think probably who exists who has a full tattoo of Richard Nixon's face on his body.
We'd have to get the fact checkers on that, but I would imagine the universe would be pretty small at this point.
Yeah. If you, lunatic, actually have a real tattoo of Nixon's face on your body somewhere, either send it in or you wouldn't be the first mostly nude human to appear on hotlou Happy Hour, and we'd love to see your tattoo with Zuck's approval,
For what it's worth, Lou, I would much rather get a full head of Richard Nixon tattoo than shave my head live on
the show. We might have to construct some way to make that happen. So lunatics, if you've got any idea, let's make that happen. So, I don't think we need to really exhaust what the circumstances around Trump commuting Roger Stone's, I think you pronounce it commutation of his sentence.
And ever since I heard about this, I've been meaning to look into, and I think I have an understanding of this, but so let me start with, I've always found these commutations or
pardons
just totally stupid and monarchical. Like we go out of our way to have a legal system with checks and balances and the opportunity to cross-examine and all of this, and it's due process, and you have rights that can't be violated and yada, yada. And then you get a guy who happens to be president who can just go, yeah, screw all that. I don't understand where this makes any sense in our legal system other than it's something we just took from the King of England and said, well, he does it, so we're gonna keep doing that.
Yeah, and I think that would be most people's reaction to this sort of thing. And I think the counter argument to that, generally speaking, is when there are these what appear to be obviously innocent people who have been imprisoned, but they don't have necessarily the means or resources to go through appeals or through the Supreme Court, or they don't have access to the people that might be able to make that happen, or they don't have a compelling enough case to make any of that stuff happen. So you do leave it in the hands of like one person. And I think invariably we've got, it's a system that's so easily abused. And I think every president has abused it since it's been happening. And even in the circumstances where it's been applied appropriately, it doesn't preclude all of the abuses that happen along with it. And I think we saw that a little bit on Friday, but I don't even know that we need to spend a whole lot of time. I think we're pretty aligned, and I think most Americans are just confused by this whole concept.
Yeah, I saw one of the more centrist news aggregators I subscribed to this morning. It's a little bit like our guest for tomorrow, but it's not our guest from tomorrow. But we'll get into that. But every day they sort of do, well, the left says this, the right says that, and the first quote from the right was, today's was the right is mixed about this, and so the first quote they had, I think it was from National Review, said, "This is yet another reminder of the kinds of shady scum that this president has surrounded himself with for his entire adult life." And I was like, well, yeah, there is that.
Yeah, I mean, it is shocking when you see how many people that were associated with the Trump campaign or his like business dealings ahead of time that are either in prison or have been convicted, or are some level like
just bad people. Like these are just bad people.
Exactly. Yeah.
And every politician has some of that. I mean, it's just like there's bad people, and
Yeah.
bad people are often attracted to wealth and power.
Yeah.
And so, it's not to condemn every elected official who's had an encounter with a bad person, because it's almost for sure going to happen. But there does seem to be a particular collection
Yeah.
or a hit rate in this administration that's a little something.
Yeah.
But I don't think you wanted to talk about the particulars. You've tried to move on from that
No.
a couple times.
Yeah, the only particular I think is worth noting is that if you haven't watched, because I don't know everything about Roger Stone, but every time I start digging in, I can't unearth anything but just like disgusting history, up to and including his like almost his entire strategy around dealing with a crisis is a 3-word slogan. Are you familiar with it?
No, I'm not. Maybe when you say it, I will be, but off the top of my head, no.
Deny. It's deny,
Oh,
deny,
deny,
deny.
deny, deny. Okay, I
Yeah,
didn't realize that was attributed to him. I guess that's how much attention I've paid to this. But I certainly
yeah,
heard that,
yeah,
and it is employed by many, many, many elected officials,
yeah.
as it will be undoubtedly over the next few months as we close out this election cycle by everyone involved.
Yeah. So I think many employ it. They're just not nearly as proud of gaslighting the American public as Roger Stone is. But so anyway, there's a documentary called Get Me Roger Stone on Netflix. I recommend you check it out and fact check it and come back to us in the comments when the time is right. But really the point that I wanted to bring up here that I don't think really people are familiar with, that you masterfully segued us into this, is the fact that this news dropped on Friday night, kind of late. And I don't think a lot of Americans really realize that when that happens, it's not a coincidence. It's actually designed leading into the weekend to avoid like massive news cycle.
Exactly. And to the extent that news cycles are still a thing, I mean, they are. They're just of sort of varying size and scope than they maybe once were. But in the industry, Lou, it's called the Friday news dump. And if you've got some real bad news that is going to be problematic for you, you package that baby up and you pre-load it into whatever software you use to disseminate information, and you set that baby for 5:30 on Friday afternoon, and you let it go from there, because you're counting on a whole bunch of things, not least that many reporters are, more or less 8 to 5, or at a minimum like to be off doing whatever it is they do on Friday afternoons. So you start with that, then you go to your consuming audience. For sure, by and large, is not watching TV nearly, and this is just statistical, is not watching TV or consuming any kind of web-based news on Friday afternoons nearly to the level they are at any other time of the week. And it's time to, the best version of this is when you can hit it on a Friday afternoon where that's like a holiday weekend where Monday is a day off. I mean, that's when like the dream scenario to drop bad news is. And that way you've got a full, 72 hours plus of opportunity for that story to just go bye-bye into the memory hole. And arguably that happened here with Mr. Stone, where when you brought it up to me as something you wanted to talk about, I went, God, when was that? Was that a couple weeks ago? And I was just like, no, that's essentially fresh news. That's about as fresh as it gets. But it struck me as being a long time. I've done a lot of stuff since Friday afternoon.
Yeah, and as I look at like Reddit's news, and that always has like the freshest, craziest story, like that isn't even like on the top of the list anymore. And I didn't see it really go crazy over the weekend, despite the fact that I don't know that there's another person like I think there's like Putin and Roger Stone right now for like real life, what feel like almost comic book villains that exist. And here we have the president like commuting his sentence, which, by the way, like I said, I didn't even want to get into all these details, but the commutation of his sentence also means that he doesn't have to admit guilt, which I don't think people understand with the pardoning process. If a president pardons you, in that case, you actually have to admit that you are guilty of this crime. But by commutation, it just means that he doesn't have to serve the sentence. And I actually had a question for you regarding that, which was, I thought commuting a sentence basically meant that it was put on hold indefinitely and that it could resume at some point. Is that not the case? Does commuting mean it just
I
gets
have
erased?
no idea. My wife and I were talking about this on Saturday morning, and or it was yesterday morning, and I intended to go to the Google and do a little bit of research. I don't know, but I think you're right. I might have even had it backwards, but I thought when you're pardoned, it's as though your sentence never happened, but when it was commuted, it's still on your record, but you just don't have to serve the time. And maybe I have that backwards, but that's the difference in terms. It's one is one and the other is the other. But I forget which. I'm a bad host because I forgot to go look it up.
Well, the pardon definitely means that the pardoned subject has to admit that he or she was in fact guilty.
Yeah, maybe it's the way so a commuted sentence. I don't know whether it's suspended indefinitely, though. And I do wonder if there's a strategy among these monarchical executives to do one versus the other. I mean, there must be. I mean, there must be a way that they process, like, well, should we just give them a pardon or should we commute the sentence? I mean, I'm sure there's some thought that goes into that.
Yeah, and I think, in fact, there is in this particular case, because at some point, Roger Stone can be now acquitted, whereas had he been pardoned, it basically means, yes, he's guilty in perpetuity, whereas alternatively, if they commute the sentence, at some point, if there's some reason, he could actually become acquitted and that crime could go off of his permanent record. But yeah,
so
in any
I
case,
don't know, 'cause I'll have to do a little more research on it. I know there was some caterwauling about, the sort of nature of the crime he was convicted of being more or less something the argument goes, and I'm not espousing this argument, but the argument goes that he was more or less committed of a political crime, and that if the FBI wants to get you caught in a perjury box, they will, and they'll get at least that charge out of it, which such is the state of sort of discovery in this country, that if you sit down in front of the police for more than a few minutes without a very savvy lawyer in front of you, you will get caught in a perjury trap. And that doesn't mean you are a liar necessarily. I mean, I guess legally it does, but then they try to do that so that they can hold that over your head and then go for a bigger target. They can go for the president. And this came up a lot in the impeachment, right? That a lot of the underlying crimes that Trump associates were charged or convicted with had nothing to do with any alleged association with Russia. It had to do with lying to investigators that were pursuing the investigation of Russian involvement in the election and whether the Trump campaign knew about it. And so it always was very disingenuous to sort of say, well, we're getting all these convictions. And it was like, well, you're getting convictions for crimes that didn't exist until you started mentioning the underlying allegation. And that's a tool that's used. I find it disingenuous, and I don't remember whether Roger Stone was part of that or not, but I do know that at least one of his crimes was essentially this lying to investigators deal, which, by the way, don't do. This is not legal advice. But the point is, even if you're a sophisticated person with wealthy attorneys, they can get you in a perjury trap. They will.
Yeah. And, this goes to this bigger thing that I've told people for years, and I'm sure you espouse this argument as well, and you more or less said it now. Never, ever, ever, ever talk to the police without an attorney. Ever.
Nope. Ever, 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 ever. Do not even, I mean, I'm talking about, like, if you're getting pulled over for speeding, like, that's probably the only exception. If you suspect you may be guilty of anything beyond that, just get arrested, go to jail, and get your attorney, because there is no way this will wind up better for you.
And we're going to put a link in the show notes to this amazing video of this defense attorney that goes through the 13 reasons that you can be completely innocent of something and end up in jail without ever really even committing a crime of any kind because you spoke to the police. And he goes on and on and on for 45 minutes, and you can't believe it. The first time I watched that video, I was like, I'll watch the first 3 minutes. An hour later, I'm done, especially because as he reaches the end of the list, and I'm spoiling the ending for the lunatics here, But he goes, all right, you don't have to take my word for it. Here's Officer Johnson. And then Officer Johnson comes in and he's going to try to refute everything that I just said. Officer Johnson goes, yeah, everything he said is true.
Yeah, well, and I remember my awakening on this was when I took my Fourth Amendment criminal procedure course in law school, and we spent a whole semester going through all the ways that police more or less intentionally trip you up to try to get you to either admit guilt or, I mean, it's wild. And how for many, many, many years at this point, the Supreme Court constitutional jurisprudence has all been on one side of it. I mean, and you know, when we talk to our friends at Institute for Justice, I mean, this is more or less, it's a close cousin to that, where the law is very, very much on the side of the law enforcement officer. And we can talk about whether that's good or bad as a policy, but if you get pulled over for a suspected traffic violation and you start talking, this can wind up with a lot more bad things. Like, so in other words, if you're going to get arrested, which is different from the police officer just saying, like, would you come with me to the station? You're still not under arrest. And a lot of people don't really understand that they still have the freedom to walk away up until the point where the police puts you under arrest. So we didn't intend to talk about Fourth Amendment and all that today, but it's a fascinating look into the way that jurisprudence works. And if you're willing to engage people on that, it's another way that we ought to be looking at the situation that, for example, resulted in the death of George Floyd and others for ways that we can basically take a holistic look at how we police. Because a lot of what the powers that a police officer has when they execute a search warrant or stop you or anything like that, those aren't inherently racist in any way, shape, or form. But sometimes I'm open to the argument that the way they can be used might have a disparate impact that's worth looking at.
Yeah, especially police and prosecutors who are measured on them basically punishing people for crimes or preventing more crimes from being committed. So the incentives are very strange when they think they've found the perpetrator of the crime, and even when they're presented with evidence that prove that the person didn't do that, it can be politically damaging for them to reveal that stuff rather than convict the person that they know is innocent. And you know, it's a scary scenario. I'm not saying that all police or all prosecutors do that, but the frequency at which that can happen is pretty scary.
No, I agree with you that the incentives are very much on the side of the police and the prosecutors in those cases. And that's more or less a continued policy decision as a country that, you know, we want, right, by and large, we want bad people put away, and the odds are overwhelmingly pretty good that they've got the right person that committed the crime. I mean, we're not talking about this happens in 50% of cases. I mean, these are the outliers almost by definition, but they do happen.
Yeah. Well, we could talk for another couple hours on that whole topic.
I would actually, just one more little recommendation. There's a book audio book I'm listening to right now that my father-in-law referred to me, called Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. And it starts out with the arrest and subsequent death of Sandra Bland, and which was another in the kind of litany of, if you will, Black Lives Matter cases. And I haven't gotten through the book yet, but it's allegedly starts and finishes with that case, more or less as a case study of all of the ways that this doesn't get into law or as much, but it gets into the way that we as basically psychological creatures cannot understand each other at any level beyond what the vast majority of things. And it's really fascinating. He gets into cases that involve Cuban spies. If you remember, it was probably when we were maybe just shortly after we were graduating from college, there was a couple girls in Italy. One of them wound up dead, and the other one wound up serving 8 years for her murder. And I can't remember her name, but there was no chance she did it, but she wound up serving 8 years on a murder sentence before she was finally exonerated. It gets into Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the application of torture. Wow. It's case after case of really interesting analysis where our entire the entire evolutionary product of what makes us humans is basically telling us the wrong thing. and how often that happens in society, and versus not. It's a fascinating book. I probably, this is one where I'll probably buy the hard copy and read it over again.
Nice. It just you brought it, like, I experienced a little PTSD there because I had an ex-girlfriend that she and I had a 3-year argument where she wanted to buy shelves to put a bunch of her stuff on these shelves. And I was like, we're not putting shelves in here. The solution to having too much stuff is not to buy more stuff. And that argument went on for years and years and years. And when it was all said and done and we got settled, she just went and bought the shelves. Turns out she meant dressers the whole time. So sounds like a good book that awesome. I might need to learn or to read and better understand a little bit more. So, and on that level, or related to this, the Washington Redskins are going to have a new name soon.
R.I.P.
Yeah. It was a long time coming. Even if you agree or disagree, I think we've already talked about it. And I've had many private conversations with several loyal lunatics about this. But regardless of where you stand on this argument, you knew it was inevitable. You knew it was inevitable 5 years ago that this was coming. And
yeah, I mean, you did. And that's like the one logo that seems so, there's a concept in politics called the Overton window, that within this bracket are things we can discuss in polite company. And, without getting into it, there's a frequent challenge by my hero and best friend forever, Ben Shapiro, that there's a explicit effort to move the Overton window further and further and further away from, what common sense might dictate. But I think as applied to sports, and particularly offensive mascots, this was the one that was the most obviously outside the Overton window for the most people. I mean, you can probably next point to the Cleveland Indians mascot, but then beyond that, we're mostly sort of talking about, well, is it really offensive to call them the North Dakota Sioux? Is it really offensive to call them the Atlanta Braves? Is it really offensive to call them the Notre Dame Fighting Irish? Or I saw one today, is it really offensive to honor the Minnesota Vikings? This one, as far as I could tell, was offered without any sense of irony, because without even doing the slippery slope argument, you kind of go, well, all right. I mean, like, you're balancing right, harm and good, and you and factoring in tradition and stuff like that. When were the Washington Redskins named? I actually don't even know. I mean, but they're one of the older franchises in the National Football League.
Well, I read earlier, and I haven't fact checked this, but I think it was like 1972-ish, and they also the name and the name was suggested by an Indian, as well as the logo was designed by an Indian. However, maybe I shouldn't even said that because I didn't get the opportunity to fact check it. But really, our Super Bowl champion, Kansas City Chiefs, too. I wonder if they're next.
There you go. Right. Exactly. And so you, like you said, it was inevitable. I think the only, I don't care. Call your team whatever you want. It doesn't matter to me. But the only trepidation I think I have processing this is the slippery slope. Like, what's next? And are we going to go down? And I don't care. I'm not a Kansas City Chiefs fan. I'm not an Atlanta Braves fan. I'm not a Cleveland Indians fan. It affects me none. If you all want to rename your teams, go ahead. I hope one of them goes with Bidet Makaska. Just the same. But as far as it goes, like, I don't like the success of cancel culture by and large, as we've talked about ad nauseum. I do think this one is the easiest one to resolve. If I think this is only slighting the French, so I'll go with that, as my ethnicity is French. But if some heads had to roll, I'm glad it's that one. But I kind of hope it stops at that point. I hope we're done with this for a while.
I've been working on. Yeah, I've been working on a sentiment related to this that it's too derivative, but I've been saying in my head over and over that the road to fascism is paved in wokeness. And that's why
you know my feelings on this. I mean, this is the evidence. This is not the evidence. This is evidence of a totalitarian mindset. And that is extremely troubling to me. And and it should be to everyone. Not the Redskins losing their name, but the mindset that leads you to that, the mindset that leads people to basically say that there is no such thing as cancel culture when literally everything is being canceled. And I'm not talking about the pandemic. I'm talking about, you cannot, there was an entire 150 authors wrote a thing. We didn't really get after this too much, but in the Harper's Magazine, and we're talking like all but 3 were card-carrying members of the progressive left, basically saying, okay, we've gone overboard with cancel culture. That article was canceled.
Yeah. And what's funny is just in my Facebook memories this morning, I am guilty of this. So I'm full on hypocrite today, because today is the 5-year anniversary. Oh, no, sorry, 8-year anniversary of the Penn State Joe Paterno scandal, which dropped. And
by the way, also discussed in the Malcolm Gladwell book I just referred to you.
Oh, fantastic. So that's definitely going in the show notes too. But my comment 8 years ago today on Facebook was that Penn State had the opportunity to take that statue down either by their own choice or by force. And
I defy anyone. This is what this book is just so well written. I defy anyone to either read or listen to the chapter on Penn State and help me understand how justice was served basically for anyone. I mean, it just lays low this concept that we got it wrong for a long time, but eventually we got it right. And it basically concludes with the president of Penn State, Graham Spanier, was fired and may even have been convicted of a crime dealing with this when, again, it's like one book that I just recently read, so recency bias. He had no reasonable way of doing anything other than what he did. That his conduct was essentially, we needed now I'm just going to be offensive. We needed a scalp and we got one. And that, yeah. and that's a bit about, and the book's not even, you have to read, the book's not even written as an opinion book. I mean, it's basically saying all of the psychological goalposts that were flown by, not because we were under any kind of pressure to protect the people directly involved. Why am I blanking on his name? The defensive coordinator, the retired defensive coordinator, by the way, at that point.
I'll get his name here in a second, but go on.
Yeah, but that basically we're just not capable as a species of getting to the bottom of this. He actually, Bernie Madoff is another example, and he interviews at length the guy who nailed the Bernie Madoff thing 12 years before the official kind of government regulators got around to it, and this guy had been mailing them everything he had, and Madoff was allowed to continue to operate for that time. I just can't recommend it enough. Great book. Go buy it. I earn nothing from this other than your love and admiration.
Yeah, the point that I wanted to make was, it was pretty interesting there too, is I don't think anybody is in the camp that, Joe Paterno statue should have stood up, and there were calls for it to be torn down at the time, and nobody rushed the statue to tear it down 8 years ago. Wasn't right. A group of 15 people. In fact, Penn State,
the university took it down.
They did, and they did it quietly overnight on July 22nd. So what's that? 9 days from now. So, they listened and they made the choice, and they went through all of the process to make that happen. And that's not what we're seeing anymore, if it's statues or names or whatever.
Well, I'll give you an example, though, Lou. The Mississippi state flag, which has had the Confederate battle flag as part of it for 120 years, which is kind of wild because it wasn't even during the Civil War. They adopted it decades after the Civil War had been, lost by Mississippi and their fellow Confederate states. That flag is going to be changed, and it's going to be changed on an overwhelmingly bipartisan vote that took place over the last week or two, and is going to be signed into law, or has been already, by the Republican governor of the state of Mississippi. And you can say, and I would say, that that's overdue. But the point is that arguments were made, arguments were listened to, people's minds were changed, and as a result, we can all be happy about the fact that this is gone, and we don't have to have this social unrest and anxiety that causes people to retroactively want to defend, the statue of General Forrest, right?
Yeah.
Which is happening, right? People are going to Northerners are going to bat for Stonewall Jackson, which makes no sense other than they're probably not really wanting to do that, but you're putting them in a corner. Educate, persuade. It will work. We have in Minnesota a Capitol Commission that oversees the statutes on the Capitol lawn. Put together a little document, go up there, have your petition heard. It might take some time, but you'll get there.
So all that said, I've got a great name for the Washington Redskins, a new one. I want your take on it. All right. So I'm thinking Washington Bullets.
I love it. Oh yeah, because what could go wrong with a bullet?
I'm hopeful. We'll see what happens.
It sounds like the leading contenders are going to be either the Washington Red Tails, which was a group, an all-black group of World War II or Vietnam era fighter pilots. Were called the Red Tails, and so they wouldn't even have to change their logo. I mean, they don't have to change their color scheme and whatnot all that much, and it obviously sounds a lot like Redskins. That's my pick. That's what I would go with. Or Pigskins, which honors their hogs, which has kind of been a nickname for some of their fans. I don't know. That one seems a little weird to me. But Daniel Snyder has shown himself to be kind of a weird dude. So I would hope they just go with Red Tails, although maybe they'll come up with something out of left field.
Yeah, I don't know. As you were talking, I was so bored by those names, I started thinking of other team names. So maybe they'll come up with something.
What about Fighting Hawks? How about the Washington Fighting Hawks?
Yeah, that'd be amazing. But I was thinking the other day, Dan Barrero on KFAN and on the sports talk radio in Minnesota and beyond, we're talking about this amazing story. You might not know this as a Jordan resident, but maybe as an employee at a company in St. Paul, you've seen the little rechargeable scooters that you can rent.
I've used them. Yeah, Lime. I use them all the time.
Yeah. So there's all kinds of different brands, but I don't know if you know this, but people pick them up at night, and it's just like anybody can pick them up and earn money. They just recharge them and then put them back out on the sidewalk. And
I didn't know that part of it. I knew that Uber drivers or Lyft drivers, I forget, there's affiliations there.
Yeah, Lyft has their own brand, and so does Uber, of them kind of all over. Lime happens to be in Minnesota where they all are, but it turns out like collecting these things has been like really competitive, and in like the most competitive environment has been San Diego, and the people who collect these things and charge them are unsurprisingly called chargers. So the San Diego Chargers are finally getting some press.
Anyway. Oh, you had to work hard to get there, but you got there.
I did. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I think we'll see. It was inevitable that the name is going to happen. Hopefully it's resolved in a way that we don't have more fascists 10 years from now claiming that the name is racist over the Red Tails and honoring a different group and, retaking the motive and reframing it in their own way to change the name again.
I think, Lou, if the team in Washington releases its new name Friday afternoon, none of us are going to be happy Monday morning.
Perfect. Well, we were going to talk a little bit of school talk. Should we maybe table that for later in the week when we know a little bit more about it?
Why don't we table that? Because as we sit here on Monday, the legislature went back into session about 3 hours ago. And this again, highly unusual for the legislature to be meeting at this time of the year, but here we are. And this will be one of the items I know they're going to discuss. I shot it to you in a text, and I'd like to work on, I think it'd be fun to have a hotlou.com debate, if we can arrange it, between an opener and a closer of our public schools, and we can facilitate and join in a respectful way. I'd love to make that happen. I don't know if it's possible, but I'd love to make that happen if we could pull it off.
Yeah, and Lunatics, let us know in the comments if you'd like to see something like that. The Zoom stuff is a little bit more challenging when you've got like 4 people all in here and trying to kind of control that stuff. And Mike and I are not mediators, so trying to facilitate
No,
it.
but perhaps what we'll do is we'll have a vote, and whoever is deemed to be the winner of the debate, the loser or losers, if we decide that we're on the other side, have to change their Facebook profile picture to the former Washington Redskins logo for 1 week without comment.
I'd be very interested in being able to do that. And I really admire you not throwing any sort of head shaving stakes into the bet either. Or Roger Stone logos.
I'm very consistent on this.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll work on the Roger Stone tattoos, the debate format, Washington Redskins logo profile pic updates, and all hotlou things, including show notes, YouTube videos. But all of that stuff is kind of secondary to tomorrow's guest. I'm really excited. Isaac Saul is joining us. He's the founder of a newsletter called Tangle, and I'm going to misrepresent it yet again, but it's not a centrist email, but he does try to share, I think, what he thinks are very reasoned arguments from all perspectives related to news items, particularly in kind of politics. So
I love this. This is my favorite current form of journalism, is that you're calling it what it is. You're not trying to hide the ball. To the extent that there's any bias in and we'll ask him about this, to the extent there's any bias, it's selection bias, which is a thing, and you have to be cognizant of it, but it's a far less, I guess you could say it's a more pervasive form of bias, but it's also a less disgusting form of media bias than what I see in the political press in particular.
Yeah. So I'm super excited. I hope you'll tune in. We'll put up the promo so you can get a reminder for when we do it. But we'll both be live 4 p.m. Central on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter. And if you've got questions, leave them in the comments here for him specifically. But we'll also include links to subscribe, because I think it's a really great newsletter, like Mike just described. And Mike and I have been kind of privately debating doing something similar. And we'd be interested if the Lunatics would want to read something like that from us. So with that, I think it's a good way to kind of tie a bow on the show today. Thanks for tuning into, I don't know what we would call today's show, because we were sports and politics and Joe Paterno and beyond, but and commercial for tomorrow's show. But anyway, thanks for tuning into today's hotlou Happy Hour. I am your host, hotlou.
I am Washington Redskins Hall of Famer to be, Mike Franklin.
And we'll talk to you on Lose Day.